The early life of Steve Jobs. When we talk about Steve Jobs, most people immediately think of Apple, the iPhone in their hands, or the iconic black turtleneck on stage. But before the world-changing innovations, before the fame and fortune, Jobs' story began with something very different: rejection, uncertainty, and being forced to find his place in the world. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But from the very first day of his life, his path was unlike most children. He was put up for adoption by his biological parents, young university students who felt unprepared to raise him. That decision could have been a tragedy. Instead, it became one of the most important blessings in Steve's life. He was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, an ordinary working-class couple. Paul was a machinist who loved working with his hands, and Clara was a warm and caring homemaker. They didn't have wealth, but what they gave Steve was unconditional love and a stable foundation. Criticism from the very beginning. As a little boy, Steve was different. While other kids might have been satisfied playing outside, Steve wanted to know how things worked. Radios, televisions, record players. If it had screws, wires, or circuits, he wanted to take it apart. Paul, his adoptive father, noticed this curiosity and patiently taught him how to use tools. He showed Steve how to carefully assemble and disassemble machines in the garage. Paul would often tell him, "Whatever you build, build it well. A job should be done with precision, even the parts people can't see or open." This simple teaching, craftsmanship, and pride in details would stay in Steve's heart forever. Years later, when he was designing the inside of Apple computers, he demanded beauty even in the parts that customers would never open or see. That came from his father. School. A child who didn't fit the mold. In school, Steve's intelligence was obvious, but so was his rebellious spirit. Teachers often labeled him a troublemaker. He would play pranks, sometimes setting off firecrackers under his teacher's chair, or push back against rules he thought were meaningless. But behind the mischief was something deeper. Steve hated memorization, and he hated doing things simply because that's how it's always been done. He wanted reasons. He wanted to ask why. One teacher, seeing his potential, decided to challenge him instead of punishing him. She offered him candy and small amounts of money if he would finish his assignments. To her surprise, Steve not only finished them but excelled, scoring among the highest in his class. It wasn't a question of intelligence. The truth was that traditional education could not contain him. Growing up in Silicon Valley. The environment around Steve was also shaping him. He grew up in Silicon Valley, not yet the global technology hub it would become, but already buzzing with electronics companies and ambitious engineers. Young Steve was fearless. At age 12, he wanted parts for a science project, so he opened the phone book and called Bill Hewitt, the co-founder of HP, directly at his home. Imagine a 12-year-old boy calling the head of a major company. Instead of brushing him off, Hewlett admired the courage and gave him the parts. He even offered Steve a summer job at HP. From this, Steve learned an invaluable lesson. The world doesn't have walls if you dare to ask. Opportunities often come to those bold enough to reach out. As Steve entered his teenage years, another side of him grew stronger: his rebellion against conformity. He wasn't only fascinated with circuits and gadgets, he also dove into art, music, and Eastern philosophy. He experimented with meditation, read books on Buddhism, and later even traveled to India in search of meaning. This wasn't the usual teenage path, but it planted a powerful seed. Steve began to believe that technology and the human spirit must be connected. Machines should not just compute, they should inspire, elevate, and make people feel something. The seeds of his blueprint. So, if we pause here, before Steve even reached adulthood, we can already see the outline of the blueprint of Steve Jobs taking shape. 1. Relentless curiosity, taking apart everything to learn how it works. 2. Rejection of the ordinary, refusing to simply follow rules without meaning. 3. Boldness to ask, believing even a child could call a company president. And 4. A blend of tech and spirit, seeking not just efficiency, but beauty and purpose. These were the seeds planted in a boy who one day would reshape the world.
Birth of Apple. Imagine two young dreamers in California, both named Steve. One of them, Steve Wozniak, was a quiet, humble genius who could design circuits the way an artist paints on canvas. The other, Steve Jobs, was a visionary, a young man who could look at a raw piece of hardware and already see the future it could become. It was the mid-1970s. Computers were giant, intimidating machines, locked away in laboratories and corporate offices. Ordinary people couldn't touch them, let alone understand them. But inside a small garage in Cupertino, something extraordinary was about to begin. Wozniak and Jobs created the Apple I. At first glance, it didn't look like much. It was just a single circuit board. No case, no screen, no keyboard. To most people, it looked unimpressive. But Jobs didn't see it as a piece of hardware. He saw it as the beginning of a revolution. Jobs convinced a local computer store to buy their first batch. This wasn't just a small victory. It was a display of Jobs' rare gift, the ability to sell not only a product, but a vision of the future. He could make people believe in something before it even fully existed. Then came the Apple II. This was different. It was sleek, colorful, and most importantly, user-friendly. For the first time in history, people could own a computer that truly felt personal. Families could use it, students could learn with it, hobbyists could explore new ideas with it. The Apple II wasn't just another machine. It was the birth of the personal computer industry. And in the process, a young Steve Jobs, still in his 20s, became a millionaire. But here's the part that truly mattered. Jobs wasn't driven by money. He was driven by something far deeper, an obsession with design, with simplicity, with elegance. He believed technology wasn't just about function. It had to inspire. It had to connect with human emotion. It had to be, in his words, insanely great. And with that belief, the foundation of Apple and the philosophy that would define Jobs' entire career was set. The Macintosh Revolution. By the early 1980s, Steve Jobs had a new dream, the Macintosh. This wasn't just another computer. To Jobs, it was going to be a computer so intuitive, so beautiful, so simple that anyone could use it. He wanted to create a machine that would empower people, not intimidate them. To achieve this, Jobs formed a small team inside Apple, known as the Macintosh team. He pushed them to their limits, demanding not only innovation, but perfection. People who worked with them often described what they called his reality distortion field. Jobs had this uncanny ability to make the impossible seem possible. If an engineer said, "This can't be done," Jobs would look at them with complete confidence and say, "Yes, it can." And somehow, weeks later, the impossible became reality. He didn't just motivate people, he bent their perception of what was achievable. The Macintosh became the embodiment of his vision. It wasn't just a machine, it was a piece of art. It had a graphical interface with icons and a mouse, a concept almost unheard of at the time. It was friendly, inviting, and human. In 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh to the world with a commercial that would become legendary. Directed by Ridley Scott, the ad aired during the Super Bowl. It showed a bleak, dystopian world, gray, oppressive, dominated by conformity. And then, a lone hero breaks the chains, declaring, "1984 won't be like 1984." This was more than advertising. It was a declaration of war against the old way of thinking. Apple wasn't just selling a computer. They were selling liberation, creativity, individuality. For a while, it seemed like Steve Jobs was unstoppable. He had taken technology, something cold, technical, and intimidating, and turned it into something warm, approachable, and fun. He had made computers human. But behind the scenes, cracks were beginning to show. Jobs' relentless perfectionism, his obsession with detail, and his fiery personality clashed with Apple's corporate leadership. For his team, working with him could be both exhilarating and exhausting. Some said it was the most meaningful work of their lives. Others said it was the hardest. Jobs demanded excellence at all costs, and not everyone could keep up. Within Apple's boardroom, tensions grew. Some executives saw Jobs as a visionary. Others saw him as reckless, immature, and even dangerous to the stability of the company. The stage was set for one of the most dramatic turning points in Jobs' life: the fall from Apple. By 1985, Steve Jobs had reached both the height of his career and the edge of a cliff. The Macintosh had launched to great fanfare, but its sales were weaker than expected. The machine was revolutionary, but it was also expensive and underpowered compared to its competitors. Jobs' charisma and vision had carried Apple into the spotlight, but the company now faced the hard realities of business. At the center of the storm was Jobs himself. His relentless drive, his passion, and his perfectionism had built Apple's identity. But those same qualities also created conflict. Jobs pushed his team with incredible intensity, demanding brilliance at all costs. Many thrived under his leadership, but others burned out. Inside Apple's boardroom, patience was running thin. Jobs clashed with executives, particularly with John Scully, the CEO he had personally recruited from Pepsi just 2 years earlier. At first, their partnership had seemed perfect. Scully would handle the business, while Jobs focused on innovation. But soon, their relationship soured. Scully wanted stability, discipline, and predictability. Jobs wanted risk, creativity, and disruption. The two visions collided. And then it happened. In a dramatic boardroom showdown, Jobs was stripped of his authority. Imagine that! The very company he had founded in a garage, the company that had become his life's work, now turned its back on him. Jobs later described the moment with heartbreaking honesty. "I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone." For a 30-year-old visionary, this was devastation. He had poured his heart and soul into Apple, and now he was exiled from it. Overnight, Jobs went from being one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley to a man without a company, without a mission, without a home. For most people, that would have been the end of the story. A brilliant rise, followed by a tragic fall. The world might have remembered Steve Jobs as a young, fiery entrepreneur who flew too close to the sun and got burned. But here's the thing about Steve Jobs. He wasn't finished. Instead of disappearing, he began to transform. He used the pain of rejection as fuel for reinvention. In his own words, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. Less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life." That painful fall, which could have destroyed him, instead became the foundation for his greatest comeback. Failure or foundation? After being ousted from Apple in 1985, most people expected Steve Jobs to fade away. But Jobs was not the type to retire quietly. Instead, he poured his energy and much of his fortune into creating something new. He founded Next Computer, a company that would build machines for the world of education and research. To Jobs, this wasn't just about hardware. It was about shaping the future. From the very beginning, Next bore Jobs' signature style. The computers were striking, sleek, black, minimalist cubes that looked more like pieces of art than machines. They embodied his obsession with design and beauty. Jobs once said, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." Next was his attempt to prove that principle again. But there was a problem. The computers were simply too expensive. Priced far beyond what schools or researchers could afford, Next machines struggled to find buyers. Sales were weak. Year after year, the company bled money. Critics called it a vanity project, a billionaire's toy. From a business perspective, Next looked like a failure. Yet beneath the surface, something extraordinary was happening. The Next operating system, its software, was revolutionary. It was fast, stable, and elegant, with a design far ahead of its time. Engineers who worked with it often marveled at its brilliance. And history would prove them right. Years later, when Apple was desperate for new technology to save its crumbling products, it would turn to Next. That same software, born out of what many considered a failed company, would become the foundation for Mac OS, the system that powers every Mac, every iPhone, every iPad today. Think about that for a moment. What seemed like failure was actually planting the seeds for the future. Jobs himself reflected on this period with surprising gratitude. Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. At Next, Jobs learned lessons he could not have learned inside Apple. He learned about patience, about humility, and about the importance of laying foundations, even when the world doesn't recognize their value. Sometimes, failure isn't failure at all. Sometimes, it's preparation for something greater.
Pixar, the unlikely victory. While Next was struggling, Steve Jobs made another bold, almost reckless move. In 1986, he purchased a small, struggling division of Lucasfilm for $10 million. The company specialized in computer graphics, but no one saw much commercial potential in it. Jobs renamed it Pixar. At first, Pixar didn't look like a winning bet. Jobs tried to make money selling hardware, the Pixar image computer. It was powerful, but far too expensive, and hardly anyone bought it. Pixar was burning cash, and year after year the company flirted with failure. Many people around Jobs wondered, why was he clinging to this? Why not just let go? But Jobs wasn't just investing in a product, he was investing in a vision. He believed in the magic of storytelling powered by technology. Pixar had a small, brilliant creative team, including John Lasseter, who was experimenting with short animated films. Those early shorts, like Luxo Jr., showed the world something new. They weren't just cartoons, they were alive, filled with emotion, charm, and personality, even though the characters were nothing more than lamps or toys. Jobs kept supporting Pixar through those difficult years, writing check after check to keep the studio alive. He once admitted that he spent more than $50 million of his own money before Pixar made a single dollar of profit. Then, in 1995, everything changed. Pixar released Toy Story, the world's first fully computer-animated feature film. It was revolutionary. Audiences were captivated. Children laughed and cried. Adults were moved. Critics hailed it as groundbreaking. And at the box office, it became a massive hit. Suddenly, Pixar wasn't a struggling graphics company anymore. It was the future of animation. Over the years, Pixar followed Toy Story with classics like Finding Nemo, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and Up. Each film not only a commercial success, but also a cultural touchstone, shaping childhoods and inspiring generations. And Steve Jobs, the man once written off as a failed entrepreneur, now found himself as the majority shareholder of Pixar. When Pixar eventually merged with Disney in 2006, Jobs became Disney's largest individual shareholder, gaining not just wealth, but also a place at the very heart of the entertainment industry. But more importantly, Pixar transformed Jobs. Through Pixar, he learned about collaboration in a way he never had before. Unlike his often combative leadership style at Apple, Pixar thrived on teamwork, trust, and the blending of art with technology. He learned the power of storytelling, that products, like films, aren't just about features or specs, but about how they make people feel. This lesson would prove invaluable when he returned to Apple. Pixar wasn't just a business win. It was the unexpected victory that reshaped Jobs' philosophy, preparing him for his greatest comeback. The return to Apple. By the mid-1990s, Apple was in serious trouble. The company that once revolutionized the personal computer industry was now struggling to survive. Its products were confusing, its brand was fading, and quarter after quarter it was bleeding money. Some analysts even predicted that Apple would go bankrupt within a few years. The world had moved on. Microsoft dominated with Windows. Apple, once the rebel, now looked like it was running out of time. But fate has a way of writing extraordinary stories. In 1996, Apple made a surprising move. Desperate for new technology, it acquired Next, the very company Jobs had founded after leaving Apple. The deal wasn't just about software. It was about bringing Steve Jobs back into the fold. At first, Jobs only returned as an advisor, but it didn't take long for him to reclaim leadership. He quickly realized that Apple's biggest problem wasn't its people, it was its lack of focus. The company was trying to do too many things at once, spreading itself thin across dozens of mediocre products. Jobs took a machete to the product line. He killed projects. He canceled products. He cleared away the noise. Many inside the company were shocked by his ruthless cuts, but Jobs knew that Apple had to focus or die. His philosophy was simple. Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. Then came the rebirth. In 1998, Apple launched the iMac, designed by Jony Ive. Bright, colorful, playful, unlike anything the world had seen before. It wasn't just a computer, it was a statement. The iMac didn't just save Apple's finances, it saved its soul. It reminded the world that Apple was about creativity, design, and humanity. From there, momentum built. Jobs and his team rolled out one groundbreaking product after another. The iPod in 2001 changed how people listened to music. The iTunes Store changed how people bought it. The iPhone in 2007 redefined communication itself. And the iPad in 2010 created an entirely new category of device. Each product wasn't just successful, it reshaped industries. Music, phones, computing, even retail with the Apple Store. Apple, the company once written off as a failure, became the most valuable brand in the world. And at the center of it all was Steve Jobs, the man who had been fired, humiliated, and underestimated, now returning as one of the greatest comeback stories in business history. But here's the deeper truth. Jobs wasn't just building products, he was building a philosophy. Technology, he believed, wasn't about chips or specs. It was about people, about creating tools that empower, inspire, and connect us. He once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And Steve Jobs did. His return to Apple wasn't just a return to business. It was the beginning of a revolution that would change the world forever.
Blueprint of Success. Lessons from Act 2, Steve Jobs. Now, let's pause for a moment and reflect. Because Act 2 of Steve Jobs' life wasn't just about computers or business. It was about learning, falling, rising, and reinventing himself. So what are the key lessons, the blueprint, we can take from this chapter of his journey? 1. Vision creates reality. Jobs didn't just see what a product was. He saw what it could become. The Apple II, the Macintosh. They were not only machines, they were visions of a future where technology belonged to everyone. Lesson 1. Dare to see beyond what others can see. 2. Perfection has a price. Jobs demanded excellence. His reality distortion field could push people to do the impossible. But it also came with tension, conflict, and exhaustion. Lesson 2. Greatness often requires high standards, but balance is vital. 3. Failure is not the end. Being forced out of Apple could have broken him. Instead, it became the turning point of his life. At Next and Pixar, he discovered new ways to innovate, create, and lead. Lesson 3. Failure can be the doorway to reinvention. 4. Plant seeds even if they don't grow right away. Next computers failed commercially, but their software became the foundation of every iPhone and Mac today. Pixar struggled at first, but eventually transformed entertainment forever. Lesson 5. To inspire others, you must touch both the mind and the heart. So, my friend, if you're walking through your own Act 2, struggling, building, or maybe even falling, remember Steve's blueprint. Your failure today might be the foundation of your success tomorrow. And the vision you hold, even if no one else sees it yet, could one day change the world.
Apple's revival, iMac, and the return of simplicity. When Steve Jobs returned to Apple in 1997, the company was in chaos. Its product line was bloated with dozens of computers that confused customers. The brand that once stood for innovation was now on the edge of collapse. Jobs knew something had to change, and quickly. He walked into the company like a surgeon entering an operating room, ready to cut away the clutter. He slashed the endless product lines, stripped down the chaos, and told his team to focus. His philosophy was simple. Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. And then, in 1998, came the iMac. It didn't look like any computer the world had ever seen. It was colorful, playful, and bold. Translucent plastic shells in shades of blueberry, tangerine, grape, lime, and strawberry. Computers at that time were boring beige boxes. The iMac, by contrast, looked alive. But Jobs wasn't just designing for looks. He was solving a problem. Computers back then were intimidating, tangled with cables and ports. The iMac came as a single, all-in-one machine. You plugged it in, and it just worked. Simplicity had returned. The impact was electric. The iMac became a cultural icon. It wasn't just technology. It was fashion. It was art. It was a statement. People who had never cared about computers before suddenly wanted one in their homes. For Apple, the iMac was more than a product launch. It was a resurrection. Sales soared. The company, once on the brink of collapse, was suddenly profitable again. And the world began to realize something important. Steve Jobs was back. The iMac wasn't just a computer, it was a declaration. It said to the world, Apple still matters, and we're here to change things again.
iPod and iTunes. Music in your pocket. By the early 2000s, Apple had regained its footing. The iMac had brought style and profitability back to the company. But Steve Jobs wasn't satisfied. He wasn't just interested in saving Apple. He wanted to transform entire industries. And the next target? Music. Back then, music was in chaos.
People were burning CDs, downloading pirated songs from Napster, and juggling clunky MP3 players that could barely hold a handful of tracks. Music was fragmented, frustrating, and far from magical. Jobs saw an opportunity. He asked a simple question. What if you could carry your entire music library in your pocket? In 2001, Apple introduced the iPod, a sleek, white device with a simple scroll wheel and a promise, 1,000 songs in your pocket. It wasn't the first MP3 player, but it was the first that made sense. The design was beautiful, the interface intuitive, and the experience seamless. The iPod wasn't about technology, it was about freedom. The freedom to carry your soundtrack everywhere you went. But Jobs knew the iPod alone wasn't enough. The real problem wasn't just the device, it was the ecosystem. People were downloading songs illegally because there was no easy legal way to get music digitally. So Apple built iTunes. It wasn't just a music player, it was a store. For 99 cents, you could buy a song legally, instantly, and play it on your iPod. The music industry, which had been crumbling under piracy, suddenly had a lifeline. At first, record labels resisted. They didn't believe people would pay for digital music. But Jobs, with his trademark persuasion, convinced them. He didn't just negotiate. He inspired them with a vision of a new future for music. And it worked. The combination of iPod and iTunes revolutionized the music industry. It turned Apple into not just a computer company, but a cultural powerhouse. People lined up outside Apple stores. White earbuds became a global fashion statement. Jobs had done it again. He took something messy, complicated, and broken, and made it simple, beautiful, and joyful. The iPod wasn't just a gadget, it was a cultural shift. It was proof that Apple wasn't just back, it was leading the way into a new digital age.
The iPhone, reinventing the phone. By the mid-2000s, Steve Jobs had already changed the music industry with the iPod. But he wasn't finished. He had his eyes on something even bigger, the phone in your pocket. Back then, cell phones were everywhere, but they were clunky, confusing, and uninspiring. You had BlackBerry phones with tiny keyboards. You had Nokia and Motorola flip phones. Some could play music, some could take pictures, but none of them felt truly smart. Jobs believed the phone could be reinvented, not as a device cluttered with buttons, but as a single piece of glass that could transform itself into whatever you needed. At Apple, secrecy was tight. Even within the company, only a handful of people knew the truth. They were building something that could change the world. Jobs pushed his team relentlessly. He demanded perfection in every detail, from the fluid touch of the screen to the elegance of the icons. And then, on January 9, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto the stage at Macworld in San Francisco. In his trademark black turtleneck and jeans, he smiled at the audience and said, "Today, we're introducing 3 revolutionary products: a widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communicator." The crowd erupted. Then Jobs leaned in. "Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone." The audience erupted. It was one of the most iconic product launches in history. The iPhone wasn't just a phone. It was the internet in your hand. It was your music, your photos, your life, all in one device. It redefined what a phone could be. Of course, the road wasn't easy. The first iPhone was expensive, had no third-party apps, and even lacked copy and paste. Critics dismissed it.
Some called it a toy, but users loved it. They didn't care about the missing features. They cared about the experience. It felt alive in their hands. Over time, the iPhone became more than just a product. It became a platform. The App Store, launched in 2008, opened the door for developers around the world to build apps. Suddenly, the iPhone wasn't just Apple's creation. It was a canvas for millions of innovators. From ordering food to booking a ride, from social media to mobile banking, the iPhone reshaped modern life. It didn't just change the phone industry, it changed every industry. Looking back, Steve Jobs said, "Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. The iPhone is that product." And he was right. The iPhone became the most successful consumer device in history. More than that, it became a symbol of Apple's philosophy: technology at the intersection of art and humanity.
The iPad. A new category is born. After the iPhone had redefined the smartphone, many people thought Apple had reached its peak. But Steve Jobs wasn't done. He had one more vision, a device that sat between the phone in your pocket and the computer on your desk. He imagined something simple, elegant, and intimate, not as heavy or complex as a laptop, not as limited as a phone. A device you could hold in your hands, lean back on your couch, and simply touch your way through books, movies, the web, and more. For years, Apple experimented with prototypes. Some were clunky, some were too slow. But Steve Jobs kept pushing. He wanted it to feel natural, almost magical, as if the screen itself disappeared and all that was left was your content. Finally, in January 2010, Jobs took the stage at the Yerba Buena Center in San Francisco. Sitting in a chair, casually holding a sleek tablet, he introduced the world to the iPad. Now, some people have said we need a third category of device, something that's between a laptop and a smartphone. The question has been, is there room for that? Well, we think we've got something. And then he revealed the iPad. The audience gasped. It was thin, light, and beautiful. The 9.7-inch screen lit up with vivid colors and smooth touch. It wasn't just a gadget, it was an experience. The critics, of course, mocked it. They laughed at the name, calling it just a big iPhone. Some said it would never sell, that people didn't need a tablet. But once again, Jobs proved them wrong. The iPad was an instant hit. Within the first 80 days, Apple sold 3 million units. It became a global phenomenon. Schools began using it for digital textbooks. Airlines replaced heavy pilot manuals with iPads. Artists discovered a new canvas. Grandparents discovered a new way to stay connected with family. The iPad wasn't just about technology. It was about accessibility. For children, it was the first computer they could truly use. For the elderly, it was often their first step into the digital world. Jobs explained it best. The iPad is our most advanced technology in a magical and revolutionary device at an unbelievable price. With the iPad, Apple created an entirely new category of computing. And just like the Macintosh, just like the iPhone, it once again changed how people interacted with technology. For Steve Jobs, the iPad wasn't just another product. It was a symbol of his lifelong mission to make powerful technology simple, personal, and beautiful.
The Final Years. Legacy in Progress. By 2010, Steve Jobs was no longer just a CEO. He was a cultural icon, a living legend who had reshaped not just one, but multiple industries: personal computing, music, movies, phones, and tablets. But behind the public triumphs, Jobs was fighting a private battle. In 2003, he had been diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. At first, he resisted conventional treatment, hoping to heal through alternative methods. Eventually, he underwent surgery, but the illness never truly left him. Even as his health declined, Jobs refused to slow down. He poured everything into Apple, still obsessing over the details: the curve of the iPhone's edges, the feel of the MacBook's keyboard, the way an Apple store should make you feel when you walked in. Colleagues recalled how he would push himself through exhaustion, appearing frail and thin, yet still commanding the room with his energy and vision. It wasn't just about work. It was about leaving a mark that would last beyond his lifetime. In 2011, Jobs introduced his final product launch, the iCloud. Standing on stage, weaker than ever, he spoke with quiet determination about a future where our music, photos, and documents would live seamlessly in the cloud. It was the beginning of a new era he wouldn't live to see fully realized. By August 2011, Jobs resigned as CEO, handing the reins to Tim Cook. In his resignation letter, he wrote simply, "I have always said, if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know." Unfortunately, that day has come. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. The world mourned. People gathered at Apple stores, leaving flowers, candles, handwritten notes. Presidents, CEOs, artists, and everyday fans paid tribute to the man who had, in one way or another, touched their lives. Bill Gates, his longtime rival and friend, said, "For those of us lucky enough to get to work with him, it's been an insanely great honor. Steve will be missed immensely." But perhaps the most telling tribute came from ordinary people, from families whose first computer was a Mac, from kids who grew up watching Pixar films, from entrepreneurs inspired by his relentless vision. Jobs once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe. Otherwise, why even bother being here?" And he did. The dent he left wasn't just in technology, it was in culture, in design, in the very way humans interact with the digital world. Steve Jobs may have left the world too soon, but his spirit, his philosophy, his blueprint for innovation continues to shape our lives every single day. The blueprint of Steve Jobs. Now that we've walked through the life of Steve Jobs, from his humble beginnings to building Apple, to his painful fall and his triumphant return, it's time to pause and ask, what can we learn from him? What are the principles, the mindsets, the blueprint of success that Steve Jobs left behind for us? Here are 7 timeless lessons we can take from his journey. 1. Follow your curiosity, not the crowd. Jobs never walked the beaten path.
From dropping out of college to sitting in on calligraphy classes, he followed what fascinated him, even when it didn't seem practical. That curiosity gave birth to the beautiful fonts and design philosophy that defined Apple. Lesson for us: don't just chase what everyone else is doing. Follow what sparks your curiosity. You never know where it may lead. 2. Connect the dots looking back. Jobs often spoke about connecting the dots. At the time, his calligraphy classes seemed useless. Years later, they shaped the Macintosh. Life rarely makes sense looking forward, but when we look back, we can see how every struggle, every choice, fits into a bigger picture. Lesson for us: trust the process. The dots will connect. 3. Simplicity is power. Jobs had an obsession: simplicity. He cut through clutter, removed the unnecessary, and focused on the essence. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player. It was the first one simple enough for everyone to use. Lesson for us: simplicity isn't about being basic. It's about clarity, focus, and impact. 4. Turn setbacks into strength. Getting fired from Apple could have destroyed him. Instead, Jobs called it the best thing that ever happened. It forced him to grow, to create Next and Pixar, and ultimately prepared him for his greatest comeback. Lesson for us: failure is not the end. It's the doorway to reinvention. 5. Create experiences, not just products. For Jobs, technology was never just about hardware. It was about the experience. The way the box opened, the way the screen lit up, the way it made you feel. That's why Apple product created such loyal fans. They didn't just work, they delighted. Lesson for us: whatever you do, don't just deliver a service or product. Deliver an experience that touches people. 6. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Perhaps Jobs' most famous words, a reminder to never settle, to always push further, to embrace risk, and to think differently. Lesson for us: keep that spark alive. Don't let comfort kill your dreams. 7. Leave a dent in the universe. Jobs once said, "We're here to put a dent in the universe." That wasn't arrogance, it was conviction, a belief that what we do matters, that our work can change lives. Lesson for us: live with purpose. Whatever you build, build it with the belief that it can make the world better. Closing message. So, my friend, as we end this journey through the life of Steve Jobs, remember this: he wasn't perfect. He was demanding, impatient, sometimes harsh. But he lived with intensity, with vision, with purpose. And in doing so, he gave us a blueprint for resilience, a blueprint for creativity, a blueprint for living fully without compromise. The world doesn't need another Steve Jobs. It needs you to take these lessons and write your own story, to create, to dream, to fight, to dent the universe in your own way. Stay hungry, stay foolish, and never forget, you have the power to change the world just like he did.